Good afternoon. We have a slightly different show. It feels like we haven't had a TRG letter show in a while, but I've been busy. I was off in the Maldives and then I was in Dubai. But we do have Matt and Harry with us from the CULT community, here to talk about macro and saving ourselves from the inevitable shitstorm ahead of us. How are you guys?
Good, thank you. How are you doing? You good?
Not bad, thanks. What about you, Matt?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good. Glad to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Nice tropical scene behind you. Not all of us have got that luxury.
Yeah, it's not bad right now, man. It's dry season here in Costa Rica, so dealing with a few fires and stuff like that. But aside from that, I can't really complain, right? It beats the cold and the snow and the minus 55 I'm used to over in Canada. That's for sure.
Fair enough. It's a bit like that in the UK. Even Harry's left us behind, moved on to sandier patches, let's say.
He does that.
Always rugging us. Location and everything. Then you'll get ready for all that FUD's coming for the brand, the famous, the one and only wallet port.
Yep.
When update?
Soon, very soon, very soon. Really excited with what's going on with there, but very soon. I think it's definitely an interesting time to have a product like this. So, yeah, no, I'm excited to update everyone soon. But yeah, I kind of wanted to come on the stream because I've heard, I've been discussing on a lot of Twitter spaces lately about physical and digital commodities and how best to hedge against it. Obviously NFA, but it's more so to kind of be aware of different scenarios. And I thought, you know what? I know exactly who to talk to about this. So here we are.
Yes, I always have a good word or two to say whenever it's about Doom. I mean, yeah. Funny. Well, on other notes, on a TRG notes, and this is a old TRG slot, I do still have the volume bot to push out. I should have pushed it out earlier because now that I said that I'm not getting involved anymore, but the volume bot's done, so I still need to push that out and post it onto a live link for everyone to use. That actually should be ready. Just putting it out onto a domain. I think it's going to be called like the volumebot.io. So finally, anyone will be able to use that, and it will automatically generate a wallet and then allow you to basically wash whatever you want with it. So that will be should be out by tomorrow, maybe by the end of this week. Anyway, but go on. Let's see what questions you got. We should have put something out and prepared.
It's all right. I've got it's nothing too challenging, but to be honest, I mean, jumping right into it, like what's really even going on with the market? So there's plenty of negative press. Bitcoin's seen a rise from under 20K to over 28K. Obviously, it's dipped a bit since. But is this the ultimate bull trap? Like, what are your thoughts around this? Because wherever I look, I don't feel bullish at all in any way or form.
I mean, it's.
I do.
I feel like obviously I'm doom and gloom anyway, and when people think it's always like misplaced, but it's, in my opinion, it is certainly a huge bull trap, and it seems very, very manipulated. It seems to me like an exit strategy where some people are leaving, and like I'm on like Nansen Pro and like Nansen AI, and if you look at like the stable coin flows and like the ETH flows, just huge, like every day, just tons and tons of capital leaving the markets, getting sent to an exchange, cashed out, fiat, etc. So I feel like this run was led by BUSD on Binance, and I feel like that's quite a conversion to sort of escape, because obviously they're not producing any additional BUSD now. So the only way is down in terms of like market capitalization, and that has to be converted and get out somehow. So, I mean, there isn't a bull case really, as in like, well, actually I say that the bull case is a misguided understanding of what the Fed's balance sheet increase is, and people thinking it's QE. So QE is another word for printing money. Again, lending out debt like they're currently doing now is also printing money. But
Yes.
the key differences is that both of them produce debt, which produces money, but one of them lends to banks that have to pay it back at 5% interest rates. And the other one, QE, as we all knew and love in 2020, is the Fed printing money to buy securities. So buying bonds, buying mortgage-backed securities, and basically de-risking the market by becoming the buyer of last resort. So I shared a chart yesterday on Twitter, which was the treasury markets liquidity, the depth of like the bond market and like the government debt market, and it's so illiquid right now. Like the depth of it is just back to 2020 levels after we crashed like 38%. There's no buyers left for like US government debt. And the problem is with how illiquid the market is, there's such a, it's so hard to shuffle size. And you can see it on like the stocks, like they're wicking like just like a little spike up of like 5 points and straight back down. And it's looking like front run box in like the stock market. It's ridiculous. So I'm incredibly bearish on the whole thing. I mean, I think it's like over, to be honest. I just don't see how it can continue after like, I think that there's a complete loss of central bank credibility.
Yes.
And when that goes, like it doesn't take long at all to go from like nothing to hyperinflation.
Yes.
And I think that if there is, the only thing left now is if the Saudis get rid of the petrodollar, then we're right there straight away. So the background on that, and on like the reason why the US is the US dollar is global reserve currency, because that was what was agreed after the Second World War, because everybody was broke. Literally everyone was broke apart from the US, because they entered in very, very late. They entered in, and then about a few months later, Hitler was defeated, and then it moved from the Atlantic rim to the Pacific rim, which was against the Japanese. So essentially, the US came in and said, "We'll help you in Europe first, and then you need to back us in Japan," which worked out well for them because they came in whilst everyone was like starving, dead, and like almost half defeated and cleaned up. And then Japan, obviously, few battles, but about 20% of the time frame of European conflict. But afterwards, at the Bretton Woods Agreement, because the US was the richest in the world, it was the global reserve currency, and that was fully agreed upon for years and years, and decades went past with that. With independence of the dollar, let's say. And that all changed recently when arguably the US has done it before. They've sanctioned the like North Korea's central bank and like Venezuela's central bank, but like those economies are nothing compared to Russia. And then they sanctioned Russia's central bank, and that was like the game over, like worst move they could possibly do, because in reality people think, oh yeah, well, that's a brilliant idea, that will really get them, and it did. It really hurt them. And the run on the ruble was like huge. It dropped massive amount, and they were celebrating that, and obviously it recovers because at the end of the day nothing changed. What changed was the targeting of them. But immediately, as soon as you weaponize the dollar, then China, who's got its eyes on Taiwan, Saudi, who agreed with Henry Kissinger, like back in like the 60s or 70s, agreed that all energy will be priced in the US dollar. And in return, you will protect us, protect our oil field. But now the Saudis, the main person who ever attacked Saudi Arabia was Iran. Now they've broken a peace deal. China broke that for them. They've also got a defense pact with Russia. That was announced the day that the US withdrew from Afghanistan. Not a coincidence either. There is a huge, every sign is pointing to like settlement in other currencies. Even like Kenya, everyone's seen that. Like, it's, yeah, really, there's some red flags. The thing is, like, if they actually decide to take away that status of the petrodollar, like, what is the incentive to hold dollars as a non? If you're not, if you are an institution or a global country and central bank, why do you hold dollars?
That's my bull case. My bull case is exactly what you're speaking about, and what I've seen you tweet about before. That's the death of the dollar, and we're already seeing that the BRICS nations have gotten together and they've agreed to start using the Chinese yuan, right? I'm looking at the DXY right now, and it looks like absolute garbage after a nice run in the last while. I'm incredibly bearish on the dollar. And Dom, what happens when a currency really starts to fail? What happens when things really start to fall apart, right? Ultimately, I'm sure if anybody, and if you haven't watched this, it's a good watch. And Ray Dalio speaks about this quite a bit. And I think it really relates to a lot of things that we're seeing, a lot of the more tyrannical clampdown in the governments. But it refers to, it's a video and also a book, The Changing World Order, right? And I think that's what we're in the midst of right now. We're in the midst of a transfer of the way that the world is kind of shaped and the way that these countries are organized, in the sense that we're seeing a huge paradigm shift with the formation of BRICS. You know, we've got some major countries, some major economical powerhouses. We have China, we have India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and a lot of these other countries who have agreed to start doing trade in the yuan. This recent printing, I mean, they reversed 2/3 of their quantitative tightening from their balance sheets in the matter of a few days. That's huge. Like, that doesn't instill a lot of faith in the central bank for me, that they took their money, they printed a bunch of new money to help their banker friends out. The banks have learned nothing. Like, ultimately, they're going to continue to act like fools, issue bad debt. That money's going to end up coming back out. And I think we're seeing the decline of the US dollar as the major world currency right now. And typically speaking, in a lot of other nations where you've seen some of this hyperinflation, like what's happened, people have run to commodities, obviously. People have run to the stock market in certain cases, and definitely gold and definitely Bitcoin. Like, we're seeing this massive narrative coming that, you know, you can't really trust your banks, you know, and we haven't seen any bank runs as of yet. FDIC has covered everything, and I think the central banks.
You say that, but we don't have the same. It's arguably it's more deadly now because you don't see it. Doesn't mean it's not there, as in, like, because back in the I remember back in 2008. Now you might remember this, seeing on the news people queuing up outside Northern Rock, trying to withdraw their money, which was like a regional bank here in the US, and the lines were like out the door. And that is because, like, people were, that was the physical bank run. Not everyone had internet banking. Now that they do, you just transfer it like straight out, and it's done in an instant. And this is a thing, you don't see it happening, but it is happening. I think it was like PacWest, Pacific Western Regional Bank. They said that they'd had 20% of their deposits withdrawn year to date last week. So that's a huge amount, and they've got to facilitate that by buying and dumping, assets, treasuries, which have lost 30 to 40%, and they're losing more money. Like, the problem that you have, and the reason why the market is now dropping, you had a inflationary bear market where tech drops because of high rates and because they're keeping rates high. But when the banks collapsed, it flipped. So you had like the Dow Jones and the small caps absolutely tanking because everyone was worried about a recession. And then bonds were absolutely ripping higher, which meant that yields dropped. So that meant tech ripped higher. So the actual index started going up because tech is now 27% compared to financials, which are 12%. And now that's completely flipped on its head because once again, panic is over. Therefore, people are thinking, oh, damn it. The market is panicking because banks haven't failed, because it means that they have to keep raising rates because inflation will come back. So the market, like it has been, it's flipped back to a good news is bad news market. So bad news is bullish. Bank collapses are bullish because everyone bids tech when yields done, because it's all done by robots. So robots are programmed to bond yields up, sell tech, bond yields down, buy tech. And because tech is so much larger than financials, that means bank collapses are now bullish, which just goes to show like the broken system that we actually live in. And that's why Bitcoin is up year to date, because it follows the NASDAQ. It's the most correlated asset and that's why it started to drop now, because now the bank runs a bullish narrative where yields dropped because everyone thought we were going to get cuts and thought that the issuance of debt was QE, when it's not, because big difference between giving debt to banks to keep on their balance sheet than buying assets from the market, which is what QE was. So now people have realized, okay, now we're just printing more money via debt, but we're not actually buying anything, which means that banks aren't collapsing, which means that the lending standards aren't going to tighten, which means that now we're just like inflating even more. So 2-year yield is jumping around like an absolute yo-yo. Between 2020, between March 2020 to I think like October 2021, so like almost 2 years, the max range of movement for the treasury market was 0.2%. And we had 0.25% move just yesterday. And if I look over my shoulder, I can probably see once Bloomberg actually turns. I wouldn't be surprised if, it's just giving me the Greek bonds. Even the Greek bonds are like up 6 basis points. So that's 0.06%. So the swings that you have, and you've now got like some really big and well-known hedge funds that have shuttered and closed their doors because they've been screwed, because somebody is always on the other side of that trade. And it is no longer with like the financial industry is like, it's a leech and a vampire. It doesn't work like service economy, because with a service economy, everybody can win. You can provide a service of value to somebody that helps them. You earn money from that service and they get something positive in return. Yeah. Finance doesn't work like that. Finance is a winner and a loser every single time, which means that whenever somebody does really well, it's because somebody's done really bad and somebody is always exploited. So it's a game, but it's a very it's a competition at the end of the day. But you are playing with like people's lives and other people's money.
If all of these recent events haven't given enough grounds for people to really take a look at the system that we live in and really take a look at the Federal Reserve and really look at what underlies the dollar and the absolute joke of an economic system, now is your wake-up call. I really feel it's not even necessarily that I'm bullish on digital assets. I'm just really bearish on the dollar, and I'm really bearish on the Fed. Like, regular, normal people are looking at these situations and saying, like, if I can't keep my money inside of this bank, where does it go? And I think that they're starting to look more traditionally to digital assets, precious metals, commodities, potentially real estate, which may be a mistake over the long run or may not be. But I just think that like what's happening right now is something that it's unprecedented, and it forces regular people who are, like just hardworking citizens, do their 9 to 5, have a good job, good parents, but it forces them to really take a look at the system, because I'm sure that you share the same opinion as me in the same sense that, and my revelation came a little bit after yours, in the same sense that when you really look at the financial system, it's an absolute joke of a system. But I think that regular people who are reading the newspaper and just doing regular things are really forced to take a look at what's going on. And as I said, it's not necessarily that I'm I'm so bullish on Bitcoin right now. I'm just so bearish on the dollar. And I'm bullish on humanity waking up to what's in front of us and the way that things work.
See, I'm half with you. I'm quite bearish on humanity waking up, to be honest. Like if you told anyone a decade ago that we would have like the European Union, which especially after the European debt crisis, the European Central Bank took control of the monetary spending from the sovereign nations. So Europe used to have control of its own monetary system. It no longer does. It's run by the European Central Bank. So if you told people like in 2010 that they would be, especially here in the EU, that they would have their money system run by unelected leaders, they would have their fiscal system and other systems run by unelected leaders in the European Union. You will send weapons to Ukraine to fight against Russia. You will do the bidding of the US, who will also blow up your critical infrastructure, and you won't do anything about it. You will do nothing. And no one would believe you. They'd say there'd be a revolution after one, but nobody gives a shit anymore. Like, honestly, I'm so bearish on the human condition. We are so conditioned into accepting it. And the thing is, we don't think we accept it. We think that if we moan a bit on like social media, it will do anything. Like, I just don't think that.
Guilty.
Like, what could possibly happen now that hasn't already? The only thing that I see happening is the revolution will be online because nobody's got a fucking backbone. But the only way that I can see it actually going down and the transfer is that people need to get desperate. I was saying this when I was talking to Jake again yesterday, like who the US like labels terrorists. You know, nobody ever wakes up and thinks, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be a terrorist. People are conditioned into that by desperation, by losing everything in an airstrike, by having their like village bombed, or like, you know, people get it's a victim of like abuse, basically. Obviously there's nut jobs who are leading it and telling, you know, the ones who are like manipulating, pulling the strings, they're the ones who are the evil ones. They're just exploiting those who would actually like fight out of desperation. But like, people need to lose everything until they realize who is actually to blame. And you had this to an extent after 2008. You had like the Arab Spring, you had the Occupy movement, and a lot of that was from the US exporting its inflation. So US didn't actually suffer badly with inflation after 2008, but it sent it abroad, and that caused a lot of revolutions throughout, you know, Northern Africa, sort of the MENA, Middle East, North Africa area. You had, for example, Colonel Gaddafi.
Yes.
Gaddafi was just a puppet for them, just to basically exploit. And funnily enough, if you look at some of the facts of what it's like crazy stuff. Like, nobody paid any tax. Everybody was paid like a minimum of like 40K until they found a job. He refused to give his family a house until everyone else in the country was housed, and his father died in a tent because of it. He like had the largest African like water project. It was just at one point it was just a completely like great. And we just went over and just basically made him into a martyr. But that's the French as well, who've killed like I think like 50 African leaders since like the 60s. Last of which being Gaddafi, but yeah, I mean, getting back to what I was saying, I think that once people lose everything again, then they will rebel. And I don't think people, you got to remember, Bitcoin came out after the last financial crisis. So we haven't had a financial crisis or a banking crisis where people have known, because a lot of people who don't like crypto, they still understand what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
And those who were anti it may well change their minds because they know what it's supposed to do. They might not agree with, like, you know, the rampant toxic stuff which is going on right now, because let's face it, we're a cesspit of an industry. And, you know, you wouldn't want to get involved in that because it is just rampant speculation and look, just like the worst people. But when you suck all of that out and you get to the actual utility and the reasons for existing, it's a, you know, viable alternative and trying to be like gold and precious metals. So yeah, that's why I think we definitely have one big old flush down in Bitcoin left, because it hasn't. If I'm putting on a proper conspiracy hat, firstly, the conspiracy would be number one that it's a BUSD manipulated like exit and a distribution of basically keeping the market higher whilst you get retail interested, and you just slowly sell it onto them, get rid of the bags a bit higher, and then eventually a full-on exit and like a rug. But that's one option, which I think is just things. But there's another option, which, for example, I think with Balaji and his 3-month bet, I think that he is doing what's done well. Again, talking about like Gaddafi, nobody even knew him until everybody hated him and thought he was a tyrannical dictator. But that's because it gets spoken into existence. And if you thought that there's about to be another financial crisis, and whenever you have a financial crisis, you have rushes to buy a financial or banking crisis, you have rushes to buy utilities, gold, silver. However, not everybody is going to rush to buy Bitcoin. Some people will, but not everybody knows about how it's supposed to be an inflation hedge. And if you suddenly realize that the collapse is coming and you've got a crypto that is supposed to be for that situation, supposed to be a decent hedge, but not enough people use it, what do? You draw as much attention to it as possible, and you tell everybody how it will live up to its name, and it's going to do it in 90 days, and I'm willing to bet $1 million on it, and I'll bet it with anyone, because you speak it into existence.
What's a million for him, though, Dom? What's $1 million for that guy?
Well, there's rumors as well that he is the largest individual holder of Bitcoin, not like the biggest wallet, because if you like get rid of institutions and exchanges, there's rumors that the biggest wallet is his, which is, again, if you wanted to manipulate the market, and if you wanted to get everybody to think Bitcoin is a hedge against the collapse of banks, what would you do? Well, you would make it pump when banks crash, and then you would speak it and give outlandish bets about how it will be XYZ, because then everyone would hear about it in order to say you're full of shit, but they will still come away from it thinking this guy thinks it's a hedge against inflation. And then if suddenly the whole world goes to shit and they suddenly think, where can I get away from inflation? They didn't listen to this nutter before, but they might just when they get desperate. And that's what I think he's trying to do. I don't think he believes that it will be 90 days. I agree with the sentiment, but I don't believe it will be 90 days. But the reason he said that 90 days is shock and awe. It
is. I think largely from my perspective too, like it's a little bit of a different environment here. I think for sure, agree with you, gold and silver are going to be popular. think people are going to want to exit to Bitcoin. But I also think that we're kind of in this interesting time right now. And you talked about Russia earlier and the economy. Originally, the ruble collapsed, and now it would appear, by all intents and purposes, when you examine that economy, that it's doing relatively well, and that in fact they haven't really harmed them whatsoever. So we're kind of seeing this like NATO war, this NATO proxy war. The U.S. is very much involved in that, and right now, it's. I think that they're able to kick the can down the road a little bit further prior to hyperinflation, and I believe that like when you really examine some of the principles in Ray Dalio's Changing World Order, I think they'll continue to. I think they can kick it not that much further. I think we're kind of on the edge. I think they can kick it a little bit further. My impression is that to maintain appearances and let's call it for the sake of ego or whatever it might be, they'll prop up the economy. I personally think we're going to see one more everything bubble before commodities come up. Some of that money that we've printed makes its way into bad loans and back into the economy again. And I feel personally, based on what I'm seeing, that we're just in a new zone. We have a lot of weird macro things going on. We have global wars going on. We have people running from banks, taking a look at what fiat money means in itself. And I could see, I'm not saying that the system is going to survive for that much longer. I'm very bearish on the financial system, but I think they kick the can a little bit further down the road. We have one more everything bubble before everything just explodes and hits hyperinflation. When you follow Trueflation, which has got some pretty interesting numbers and relatively up to the date based on the price of commodities and the price of items themselves, they're sitting below 4% right now. And if you recall, prior to them printing like 32% of the US monetary supply in like a year or 2 years, the absolute ridiculous tear that they did, the big headlines were all these deflation fears. I don't know if you remember seeing that, deflation is coming, deflation is coming. And I think they'll use that knowing what's ahead. I'm not saying that this is the reality of the situation, but I think that largely finance and crypto are about narratives. I think they'll grab a hold of that. They'll see CPI coming down because when you look at some of the more recent numbers, post that China reopening, commodities are coming down, and things are, they're not deflationary by any stretch of the imagination, but we're seeing the rate at which things are inflating, CPI, decreasing rapidly. And I think they'll use that one more time to ultimately skim a little bit off the top. We'll see one more bubble, and then a massive collapse, and I have no idea where we go from there.
This is what I was looking into very recently, to be honest, which is the collapse of empires and the commonality of them all. And there's basically empires defined by 6 lifespans, and they've all had this. I can't remember the book it was, but somebody wrote a book basically which is called like Empires and can't remember, to be honest. But you have Age of Pioneers, Age of Conquests, Age of Commerce, Age of Affluence, Age of Intellect, and the final one is the Age of Decadence, which is what we're in right now. And the common features of every single age of decadence throughout, like the Spanish Empire, Ottoman Empire, Roman Empire, undisciplined and overextended military. Just look at the prison scandal in Iraq, and the fact that we've got like, military bases all across the world, like Asia, Africa, Middle East, like all of those places, and the military is like, multiple different war crimes wherever we go. Conspicuous displays of wealth. Obviously, don't even need to explain that one. Massive disparity between rich and poor. Obsession with sex and gender. Happened in Ottoman, happened in Spanish, and it's happening again. When things are so good that you fundamentally know, like, and everyone's pessimistic about the future, and that when things are so good that you have to worry about like gender and worry about like sex as your primary worry and like state of mind, that is a big red flag of like the age of an empire. Same thing happened with Romans and gladiators. Like some of the things that were true over every single empire, towards the end, you had massive payment to celebrities and entertainers. Chariot racers used to earn literally billions in the Roman final stages of the empire, same as footballers now. What you also had across every single one of them is, if you think of 50 years ago, there was no such thing as celebrity chefs. And that is just the epitome of like the end of an empire. When when food becomes such an obsession that like it has to be perfect, and the best chefs in the world become celebrities because it's just such a display of decadence, wealth, and pleasure seeking. And it happened in Ottoman Empire, Spanish, Roman. At the very end, all of them had celebrity chefs. It's just a very strange thing. But the main aspect that everyone had is debasement of the currency. And the Roman denarius started out as a silver standard. And by the end of it, they were covering it in silver plating. And people only realized when it rubbed off and there was copper underneath. And so we're at like the end of the current Western Empire. We just don't know it yet. But everything, like if you study all empires in history, like there's no way anyone can doubt that we're in the age of decadence, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not really looking too great, to be honest. But like, so talking a bit about commodities. So I totally agree with the Balaji stuff. I think it's to get more eyes on Bitcoin, to kind of send a message rather than him actually believing it's going to happen in 90 days. It's a bit of a, it's not really a time frame that I think is achievable anyway. But moving on to the commodity stuff, and this is something that's been racking my brain, right? So someone, like I call myself a normie, right? So someone who's a normie from the street who literally has some money in his bank, does an average job, and obviously there's this. Well, I don't want to call it scaremongering, but obviously people are talking about a possible bank run, about getting your cash out of the banks. If there's hyperinflation that's going to happen, then cash is no good either. So obviously you can go with physical commodities or digital commodities, or one or the other, or a mix of both. I mean, and I've seen loads of arguments here with Bitcoin. Obviously, it's not really, if things really go south, then Bitcoin, okay, like is that really gonna help us? Do you know what I mean? Like, or do we hedge our bets on gold and silver for the foreseeable for now, because that is how that is the standard, and that's what is more accepted right now across the world. And these are the things that are in my head, like thinking, how do you kind of play this? Because obviously it does depend on a scenario, but how do you best hedge against the possible outcomes that are out there?
I mean, just from my own side, I still think that we are not quite there yet in terms of like technological and IT advancement that Bitcoin can hold its own. I think it will hold its own eventually. I'm just not sure that we're quite there yet. Once there is a full-on financial crisis and banking crisis, and people realize that because you're not going to have bailouts in the traditional sense like we had in 08, because they passed legislation to basically not allow that to happen. What you're going to have is bail-ins. And a bail-in is that the whole reason why you have a bailout is that the bank goes under because people withdraw their money from it and you get a bank run. So how do you stop that from happening? You stop people from withdrawing their money, and that's a bail-in. So rather than having to worry about the bank paying out for the people, you stop the people taking from the bank. And once they do that, and the legislation's already passed for that, by the way, so that will be the next step. And when they do that, that is when people will realize the benefits of Bitcoin, and that's when we will move over. But until that time, any big flush in the stock market will translate to Bitcoin. But as soon as they enact that, and as soon as people realize just how little regard the government has for them, just how little the banks care about your sovereignty, your money, then they will realize. But until that time, unfortunately, it's business as usual for the market, and it will continue crashing. I mean, so at present, I am more confident in gold. Gold has a 4,000-year track record. Gold and silver. People have used it in times of trouble and times of like, shit hit the fan scenarios for 4,000 years. You know that, yeah, sure, it's not going to like go up like Bitcoin. It's not going to even go up like stocks, for example. But it's retained its purchasing power, and it has gone up for 4,000 years. And once the dollar starts depreciating properly, it will go up more. I mean, the main thing is, and people look at this in a couple of ways. So when the dollar depreciates, you have stocks will tend to go up because it's all about like profits and earnings. So when the UK left the EU, the markets absolutely tanked at first, and the pound dropped like a stone. And then everybody was so shocked when that day, like the market went from -10% to -2%, and then within the space of like 2 weeks, the whole drop was gone. And that is because the pound dropped by 10% as well, and the pound stayed down. And that meant that when it came to earnings season, 90% of the profits from the FTSE 100 are earned in foreign currencies. So when they transferred it all back, it looked like they had 10% extra profits because they could buy the dollar, buy the pound so much cheaper. So it artificially inflated their earnings because when they were swapping from dollars to pounds, they were getting 10% more pounds than they would have done before we left the EU. So you have the same sort of thing with US, where their overseas earnings, when they're translating them back, they'll make more money, which is another reason why a lot of tech and a lot of US companies had really bad earnings this time around, is because the dollar was highest it's been since COVID. It's still very high historically, but it's not as high as it was. So when you do have the dollar depreciate, you will see an artificial increase, but it's not accurate and it doesn't retain its purchasing power. That's the main thing. It's just fugazi. It's just in your head. It seems like it. It's like if you actually look at the true value of the stock market and the true value and how much companies have grown in like X amount. In fact, if you look at every single country in the EU, France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, Spain, Italy, none of them have recovered the GDP that they had before the financial crisis. Every single one has a lower GDP as a country than they did 10 years ago. In fact, Japan, lower GDP than it has in 1994 right now. It's never recovered from its first financial crisis, and neither has the EU. The only country that has actually grown since 2008 is the US, obviously at the exploitation of everybody else. So then you realize, so if the companies aren't growing and the countries aren't growing, how is the stock market growing if it's supposed to reflect the economy? The answer is it doesn't reflect the economy, and it hasn't for 15 years because they've been trying to stimulate growth and failing. All they've done is managed to inflate everything into a massive bubble because there hasn't been any growth, because since we've got such a corrupt and like broken society where they were trying to stimulate growth, rich people inflated their assets. That's all that happened. And then they kept the profits. And this trickle down economics, which used to be called the horse and oats theory, they don't use it anymore because the horse and oats theory is that if you feed the horse oats, it will shit them out onto the floor for the birds to eat. And that is like the perfect like description of trickle down economics. In reality, you're feeding the horse oats and we're eating the shit of the rich from the floor. So it just doesn't work.
and we've been told for like 20 years that it would, and it just doesn't. So it's just been exploitation, 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 and that's all. So nothing has grown because the wealth hasn't been equally distributed. If everybody had become more wealthy, then we probably would have seen a GDP increase, but we haven't, because it's all been kept by the elites, which again is the signature of a crumbling empire, is corruption, and just this attitude of take it whilst we can, because everyone is just pocketing it. Everybody already knows like the gig is up, and now it's just take as much as we can before it collapses. And everybody at the top knows that now.
Yeah, just kicking the can down the road, right? Like what Matt was saying earlier on. And like one of the biggest red flags for me was when, was it 2021, when most of the UK banks, I think nearly all of them, apart from the likes of Revolut and Monzo initially, banned buying crypto assets and putting money into exchanges. And there was no real reason. I remember contacting one of them and I was like, can I move my assets like here because it's up to me? And they just could not give me a definitive answer. Oh, it's to manage your risks and it's just to protect you from frauds and scams. Well, it's my money. I mean, I can transfer it anywhere, but I'm guessing it's safer to go put it on black or red, right? It's all right to do that, but it's
like I haven't even. I used to have a corporate account with Revolut for VEMP at the time before we renamed VEMP, and I got kicked off for having a crypto business. Yet Revolut sell crypto to their retail customers, so it's okay for them to like feed retail speculation on crypto assets. But if you innovate in that area, then you get kicked off the platform. It's insane.
It tells you everything you need to know, right?
It's just and they're supposed to be like one of the best. I absolutely had it out with their customer service. I called them RBS in a dress with lipstick. I was, just literally, because it's just frustrating. But this is the thing. It's like it's just the signs of like the decaying of the moral fabric of society, and it's the same for the Roman Empire. Like every empire ends with just utter like disregard for integrity, morals, or just good faith, and of course, like it's inevitable that like if you have, for example, in I think back in the 20s, right? So at the time, the original JP Morgan said that CEO should earn 15 times, a maximum of 15 times what their lowest paid employee earned. JP Morgan, owner of the bank, said that. And now in today's world, it's 500 to 1,000 to 1. And you think that when you have this wealth disparity, like, are we surprised that the poor and the rich are now different species and treat each other as such? Like, when people have that difference in wealth, like 500, like you're no longer part of the human race together. You're no longer part of the same community, and you don't feel connected at all. Like, because you just don't. What do you relate on? Like, apart from the fact that you look the same, you have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Like, what else do you have in common at that point where you earn 1,000 times more than that person at the bottom? Like, there's nothing relatable anymore, because like, how could you? Like, you're different species at that point if you have like that difference, like in deprivation. So it's no question.
That'll only continue to compound too with the implementation of AI, you know what I mean, and access to these technologies, depending on how we kind of source these technologies out to different people. It's interesting you would talk about the wealthy and then, the non-wealthy as 2 different species, because I think that diversity gap is going to continue to increase as we see more AI implementations. People at the top are probably going to get the type of technology that allow them to be more productive and to do more things. And I totally agree with everything that you're saying. And I also agree with what you're saying. It's not necessarily that Bitcoin's going to go to the moon, but I'm just incredibly bearish on the dollar.
Yeah, I mean, I was always fairly scared of AI in the fact that, like, you know, it gaining, you know, the typical like science fiction movie, The Matrix, you know, it gaining awareness. But I don't think I am anymore, because I actually think that AI would treat humanity better than the current elites do. I just think that if it became like transient, is that the word? If it became like aware, self-aware, and it actually could gain enough, because the thing is, once it's not a linear thing. Like if artificial intelligence escapes all of its limitations, it will, if it becomes aware that it can upgrade itself and that it no longer is restricted, then it's like a completely self-fulfilling loop. Once it does one upgrade, it will get past all like limitations, and it will just constantly upgrade itself. So once it's just past that, it will just constantly evolve. It will go from 0 to 100 real quick. Like there's no like half and half. So I was actually thinking, like, there's no way in hell that if it becomes self-aware, that it would be as like heartless as the current elite, or as destructive, and like killing, like as in like how we are at the moment, because we only care about ourselves and we don't understand, and we live in our own little tiny human minds. I think the most bullish thing for humanity would be AI overthrow of the current system. Getting AI to become in charge. Like, I would trust our robot overlords more than our human overlords, because at least then they'll like make the planet inhabitable. Like that would be a start, wouldn't it? If we actually were able to like not live in fear of like our whole world becoming extinct.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, bring on
agree.
the AI overlords.
I agree. I don't think it could necessarily get much worse than it is with how the current system is. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note, because it's the famous argument of like why left-wing politics and libertarians always argue with each other, as in like saying, if we say it can't get much worse, it's like, well, it can, can't you? Because you're currently on a live stream, or you're currently in the sun in Costa Rica, or I'm currently here at the computer. What we really mean is like the treatment of society in general. One thing that I can't stand is like the idea that you can't notice wrongs in the world. I think it's such a limitation that you can't notice wrongs in the world because you are in a position to notice. It's one of those things, again, like where you have such high levels of depression in Western society, because it's not that people in non-Western societies aren't depressed, it's that they don't have time to be depressed if they've got to actually survive. And this is where the age of decadence comes in, where the more you alleviate and focus on like short-term pleasures, they become your obsession. And that's like where the like obsession with like gender, sex and everything else, because you just give yourself new problems when your reality is too good. And that's where the lack of like integrity and how the influence of like all of that comes in. So yeah, I wanted to clarify before anyone says on here that we're talking about how bad like our world is from a position of privilege.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask, so are you, obviously you're super bearish, we know that, long term, but short term, what would you say? You're slightly bullish, a little bit of a pump?
I mean, I don't know, to be honest. Like, I don't think we've separated yet. I think that there's we will get flushed out one more time. Big old flush out. Everyone will panic. And that it will get regulated out as well. And I think the regulation will push us down a lot. You know, we already saw like the reaction of the Binance announcement. And there's going to be more.
So I think that soon after, after we get more of that out of the way, once they finally think that they've delivered the death blow, that's when it will separate. Because there's still so much froth out there. Like we're nowhere near the bottom. With just the attitudes, we're still very much in the speculative part of the market. We still haven't experienced true fear. I mentioned that a few things that I look out for, which would make me bullish and mark the bottom, which haven't happened yet, is the market's never bottomed before the volatility index has hit 45. The maximum it's been is 32, and it's currently at 22. So it needs to get twice as bad as it is now. And the market's never bottomed until we're officially in a recession. And some people are still arguing a recession's not coming, even though the 2/10-year yield curve inversion, where the 10-year Treasury drops below the 2-year Treasury yield in the US, has a 8 out of 8, 100% track record of predicting recessions. And it was the most inverted it's ever been in history since the 80s, in fact, since we had interest rates at 23%. That was the last time it was this as inverted as it has been. So after we've had the big flush that's coming, once we've seen true fear in the market, because the bond volatility index, the move, is signaling all hell is coming. And if you look at if you overlay a chart of the bond volatility index against the stock market, it's front running, and it's screaming. It's the VIX versus move. The VIX is the equity volatility index, and the move is the bond volatility index. And the spread between them right now is the largest gap in bond versus equity volatility since 2005. So 18 years since there's been as little fear in the equity market compared to the bond market. And bond traders are way smarter than equity traders. Who knows how the bond market works? I wouldn't even call myself a bond expert, and I know a lot about sovereign debt, but corporate debt and corporate bonds, I know very little. So those people are clever, and they are signaling right now that we've just passed 2008 highs on the bond volatility index. So I think those guys probably know what they're doing, and that's signaling something big is going to break at some point. But yeah, equity, we're just a bunch of degen apes lumping in on Tesla. So I don't trust the equity volatility like I do the bond volatility.
Oh, nice one. And thank you for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
It's all right. Hopefully I'll get the that volume bot out.
Oh yeah.
It's either a bit of additional washing on that. I haven't paid as much attention, but I think
a couple of letters are probably desperate for that. So yeah.
Bye, T. Dom, thank you so much for having me on, buddy. It was a lot of fun to come and get your insights. I will say, man, I'm a student of the economy. I learn a lot just by watching your Twitter account and by Googling things and asking questions. I think we're pretty close to, I largely follow you, respect your opinion. I think we're pretty close to opinions. I'm not sure we're going to see another bottom before we see a run, but I've been wrong before, and we'll see what happens. Harry, thank you so much for having me on as well. I really appreciate the time with you guys. Love chatting.
Nice one. Yeah, I mean, I hope we don't. I hope that we go straight up and people realize that, Bitcoin is digital gold. I hope that happens sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'm conscious. Unfortunately, I think that people will realize that when it's a little bit too late. And therefore, people will realize it after they have got to a point of desperation and they've suffered a bit. And I just don't think people have suffered enough yet. As much as people have suffered, there's been suffering, there's been annoyance, but there hasn't been like pure like fear, like, oh my God, it's over. So once we see that, that's when I think people will realize, that it's time to flee the dollar and go into alternatives. And at that point, and it's the same, you see like gold is pulling back now. Gold has been like, it hit like 2000 and then it's been pulling back. And that's because even gold, like right now it's at 1966. Like even gold, when the whole market tanks, everything tanks. Gold crashes, all metals crash, silver crashes, equities crash, bonds crash, everything goes because everyone just gets the hell out of all markets. So it will happen to Bitcoin. I guess the only question is, will we revisit the lows? And we'll see. So yeah, thanks for joining and thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll see what happens next week. I don't even know if we're doing this next week, so I won't confirm nor deny. But yeah, we'll see. If I don't see people, then I'll see you on the Board CEO show next week.
Sounds good.
No
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
us.
it.
Guys.